Have you ever watched a man's career implode over a single piece of jammed printer paper I did? And I dug the grave myself. This is not about loud revenge or pathetic tears. It is about a lie worth tens of millions of dollars, exposed by a fake maintenance guy, and my flash drive packed with criminal evidence. Sit down and brace yourself, because this boardroom betrayal will make you hold your breath until the very last second. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to be completely honest with you. YouTube recently disabled our monetization, leaving us with absolutely zero budget to keep producing the content you love. If you enjoy today's story and want to help us keep going, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon, where you can listen to even more incredible, exclusive true stories brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors. You can easily join by scanning the QR code right on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description and pinned comment below. Now, let us dive right into today's corporate nightmare. Starting with my name, I am Mila Reyes. I am 34 years old, and I have spent the last 10 years surviving the absolute circus that is modern corporate America. Specifically, I work as a supply chain coordinator at AeroShift Logistics, a massive freight and shipping conglomerate headquartered right in the steel and glass heart of Chicago. I am not the type to sugarcoat things, and I have never been one for office politics. My job is highly pragmatic. I move heavy things from point A to point B without anyone getting hurt or the company going bankrupt in the process. It is a gritty, high-stress world disguised behind slick glass walls and open-concept floor plans, and surviving it requires an incredibly thick skin. That brings me directly to Julian, our Chief Operating Officer and my immediate superior. If you looked up the definition of a corporate parasite in the dictionary, you would find a glossy, professionally retouched headshot of Julian smiling right back at you. He was a man utterly devoid of actual logistical skills, but he was fiercely dedicated to his tailor-made Italian suits, his blindingly perfect teeth, and a vocabulary consisting entirely of meaningless business jargon. He never just solved a problem. Instead, he would proudly announce that we needed to synergize cross-functional paradigms to pivot our core deliverables and maximize bandwidth. It was absolutely exhausting to listen to. Julian was the exact kind of boss who would disappear for 3 whole hours on a Tuesday afternoon to get a premium haircut, and then return just in time to confidently slap his name on your meticulously researched 90-page quarterly report. He survived by failing upward, smiling brightly, and stepping aggressively on the necks of anyone who actually did the heavy lifting. For the past 6 months, AeroShift Logistics had been trapped in a state of absolute, suffocating mania. We were in the final, agonizing sprint of securing a monstrous, multi-billion-dollar merger agreement with Omnicorp, a global titan in the logistics and transportation sector. The pressure trickling down from the board of directors was paralyzing. Every single executive on the 40th floor was sweating profusely through their expensive designer shirts, desperate to make our company look like the most profitable, flawless operational machine on the current market. As the coordinator handling the raw data for fleet operations, I had unrestricted access to the actual, unfiltered numbers, and when I ran the safety and maintenance reports for the 3rd quarter of the fiscal year, my blood instantly ran cold. The numbers Julian had officially presented to the Omnicorp transition team were not just slightly optimized or creatively formatted, they were pure, unadulterated fiction. According to Julian's shiny, colorful pivot tables, our fleet accident rate had miraculously dropped by 45%, and our preventative vehicle maintenance costs were practically reduced to zero. I dug deep into the raw server logs to see exactly how he achieved this financial miracle. The truth I uncovered was absolutely horrifying. Julian was systematically falsifying transport accident reports, intentionally reclassifying major highway collisions as minor cosmetic damages. Even worse, he had brutally slashed the maintenance budget for our heavy-duty trucks, ordering the garages to skip mandatory brake inspections and vital engine overhauls just to make the quarterly balance sheet look exceptionally profitable. He was knowingly sending 2-ton metal missiles down the interstate highway system with bald tires and failing brakes, all just to secure his massive executive merger bonus. I knew I could not just sit quietly on this information. If an external auditor caught wind of it, or worse, if a driver got killed on the road, the resulting legal fallout would destroy the entire company. I printed the real data, marched straight up to the executive suite, and cornered Julian in his sprawling corner office overlooking the Chicago skyline. I dropped the actual spreadsheets onto his pristine mahogany desk and pointed directly at the glaring, undeniable discrepancies. "Julian," I said, keeping my voice low and completely steady, "these maintenance deferrals are a massive legal liability. We are skipping federal compliance checks on over 200 trucks. If Omnicorp does a deep dive during their due diligence phase, or if the Department of Transportation pulls our maintenance records, this entire merger collapses overnight. We need to restate these safety metrics immediately before someone gets hurt." Julian did not even flinch. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, steepled his perfectly manicured fingers together, and gave me a smile so incredibly condescending it made my stomach physically turn. "Mila, Mila, Mila," he sighed loudly, dragging out my name like he was speaking to a slow-witted, difficult child. "You are missing the forest for the trees here. We are in a highly delicate phase of perception management. We need to project absolute operational excellence to our future partners. Your little spreadsheets are just raw, uncontextualized data points. I am managing the overarching strategic narrative." He stood up slowly, walked around his massive desk, and leaned in close to me, his voice entirely dropping its fake friendly tone. "You are just a coordinator. Mila, your job is to make sure the cardboard boxes go on the trucks, not to question the executive vision of this company. I highly suggest you go back downstairs to your cubicle, focus on your actual job, and learn to be a better team player. Because people who do not play for the team usually find themselves playing somewhere else." The threat hung heavily in the air, cold and unmistakable. He was explicitly telling me to shut my mouth or lose my livelihood on the spot. I looked right into his arrogant eyes and realized something deeply crucial. In the toxic ecosystem of corporate America, the person who screams the truth first is never the celebrated hero. They are always the sacrificial lamb. If I went straight to human resources, or the chief executive officer right now, Julian would effortlessly spin the narrative. He would label me a disgruntled, confused subordinate who could not handle the merger stress, and he would fire me before I even reached my car in the parking garage. So, I swallowed my disgust and forced my facial muscles into a polite, entirely submissive smile. "You are absolutely right, Julian," I said smoothly. "I apologize for overstepping my boundaries. I will leave the strategic narrative to you." I turned around and walked out of his office, flawlessly playing the part of the obedient, defeated worker. But the exact second the heavy glass door clicked shut behind me, my mind shifted gears into pure survival mode. I knew Julian was going to try and bury me to protect his multi-million-dollar lie. I just had to make sure I dug a grave big enough for him first. The days following that meeting felt like a slow, deliberate suffocation. Julian was not stupid enough to fire me outright. Terminating a senior coordinator right after she raised safety compliance issues would leave a massive, glowing red flag for the Omnicorp auditors to find. Instead, he chose the classic corporate execution method. He decided to freeze me out, hoping I would crack under the pressure and resign on my own accord. It started with the digital silence. My inbox, which usually saw over 200 emails a day, suddenly went completely barren. I was quietly removed from the daily logistics distribution lists. Calendar invites for the morning operational huddles vanished from my schedule. When I did manage to show up to the weekly department reviews, Julian treated me like I was completely invisible. If I raised my hand or attempted to speak, he would seamlessly talk over me, pivoting his gaze to anyone else in the room. "Let us move forward and table that for offline synergy," he would say, effectively cutting my vocal cords in front of the entire management team. Then came the physical exile. Less than 48 hours after our confrontation, I received a cold, automated email from Human Resources stating that my workspace was being reallocated due to structural restructuring. I was forced to pack up my desk on the bustling logistics floor and relocate down to the third floor. The third floor was a desolate wasteland of discarded filing cabinets, broken ergonomic chairs, and abandoned project rooms. My new office was a cramped, temporary storage closet retrofitted with a particle board desk. It had no windows, zero natural light, and a glaring fluorescent bulb overhead that hummed with a maddening, relentless buzz. It was a sensory deprivation chamber designed to break my spirit. The social isolation was even worse than the physical one. Word travels faster than light in a corporate ecosystem. My colleagues, people I had shared lunches and drinks with for 3 solid years, suddenly began treating me like I was carrying a highly contagious disease. If I walked into the break room to pour a cup of coffee, conversations would abruptly halt. People would suddenly find their shoes fascinating, mumble excuses about impending deadlines, and scurry out the door. Nobody wanted to be seen associating with a dead woman walking. The writing was clearly on the wall. Everyone firmly believed I was going to be quietly escorted out of the building by security just days before the Omnicorp merger was finalized. They were protecting their own paychecks by letting me drown alone. The climax of Julian's psychological warfare hit exactly 2 weeks into my exile. I arrived at my windowless bunker at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday, booted up my workstation, and tried to log into the Central Fleet Management server. A cold, gray error box popped onto the screen. It read, "Access denied. Account privileges revoked." 10 minutes later, I received a 2-line email from Julian. It stated that, in compliance with strict internal security protocols leading up to the final merger negotiations, my access to the raw logistical databases was being temporarily suspended to ensure data integrity. He had effectively locked me out of my own job, stripping me of any remaining ability to monitor his fraudulent reporting. He fully expected me to panic. He wanted me to storm up to the executive suite, scream, cry, and create a scene so he could finally call security and fire me for unprofessional conduct. I did not panic. I did not even blink. I just leaned back in my cheap, squeaking chair and smiled at the glowing monitor. Julian was a man who understood optics, but he fundamentally did not understand technology. He assumed that cutting off my live server access meant I was entirely blind. What he did not know was that I had seen his moves coming from a mile away. The moment I left his office weeks ago, I knew my days on the network were numbered. I had not spent the last 14 days wallowing in misery down on the third floor. I had been hunting. Using a backdoor administrative loophole that our lazy information technology department had never bothered to patch, I had established a secure mirrored backup of the entire logistics database. Over the course of 12 late nights, long after the cleaning crews had vacuumed the hallways, I had quietly downloaded every single byte of original, unedited fleet data. I had thousands of raw work orders, deferred maintenance logs, and actual crash reports meticulously saved on an external drive. More importantly, I did not just have the real numbers. I had Julian's digital fingerprints all over the fake ones. I had spent hours painstakingly cross-referencing his polished, fraudulent accounting spreadsheets with the raw data. I mapped out exactly where he hid the deferred costs. I took time-stamped screenshots of his private Slack messages, ordering regional managers to delay brake replacements for another 6 months. I archived the emails where he explicitly commanded low-level data entry clerks to reclassify severe highway collisions as minor cosmetic transit incidents. I even pulled the server access logs, proving exactly what time and from which IP address Julian had logged in to manipulate the safety compliance cells. He thought he had buried me, but he had merely given me the uninterrupted silence and privacy I needed to build a watertight, federal-level fraud case against him. I took all of this meticulously cataloged evidence, encrypted it with a military-grade password, and loaded it onto a single, heavy-duty black USB flash drive. I slipped that metal drive into the inside pocket of my blazer, right over my heart. The corporate atmosphere outside my door was choking on anxiety and fake smiles as the Omnicorp deadline loomed closer. But inside my little windowless box on the third floor, My pulse was steady. I was not a victim waiting for the executioner's axe. I was a sniper patiently waiting in the dark. I had my weapon loaded. The safety was off, and all I needed now was the perfect, undeniable moment to pull the trigger. Friday morning finally arrived. The air inside the AeroShift Logistics building was practically vibrating with nervous energy. Today was the day. The Omnicorp delegation was scheduled to arrive at 9 o'clock sharp for the final, binding merger signatures. As for me, my employee badge had been entirely deactivated for the 40th floor. If I even tried to step out of the elevator anywhere near the executive VIP boardroom, the heavy mahogany doors would remain locked, and building security would undoubtedly be called to escort me back down to my dungeon. I was not angry, honestly. The banishment was almost a relief. I did not want to breathe the same heavily perfumed, stress-soaked oxygen as Julian and the rest of the board anyway. Instead, I grabbed a stack of blank folders and headed down to the sub-basement administrative center. Since my network access was mostly paralyzed, I figured I would spend the morning printing out my personal performance reviews and updating my physical resume. I knew that regardless of how my little USB drive played out, my time at AeroShift was coming to an inevitable end. The sub-basement was a stark contrast to the gleaming glass of the upper levels. It smelled of old cardboard, ozone, and stale coffee. As I pushed open the heavy fire door to the central mailroom, I was immediately hit by a horrific, grinding mechanical screech. It sounded like a heavy diesel engine trying to chew through solid gravel. In the corner of the room, our massive industrial-grade primary document printer was flashing a chaotic sequence of red error lights. Huddled over the machine was a man who looked to be in his mid-40s. He had the sleeves of his faded blue button-down shirt rolled up past his elbows, and his forearms were smeared with stark black toner ink. He was wrestling violently with the massive bottom paper tray, muttering a string of colorful curses under his breath as the machine continued its mechanical death rattle. "It sounds like she is ready to give up the ghost," I said, walking over and dropping my folders onto a nearby sorting table. The man jumped slightly, wiping his ink-stained hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket. He offered a tired, self-deprecating smile. "You can say that again. I swear this thing has a personal vendetta against me. I am Marcus, by the way, building maintenance. They called me down here on an emergency ticket because apparently the executives upstairs are having a meltdown over some last-minute document packets that got routed down here when the network lagged." I looked at the massive machine, then back at Marcus. Before my time climbing the corporate ladder, I had spent 4 years working as a warehouse floor mechanic. My hands remembered the language of jammed gears and stubborn rollers. I did not even think twice. I tossed my blazer onto a chair, unbuttoned the cuffs of my silk blouse, and rolled my sleeves up to my shoulders. "Move over, Marcus," I said, stepping right into the cloud of loose toner dust. "You are pulling it from the wrong angle. If you yank the primary tray while the feed rollers are engaged, you are just going to shred the paper and jam the fuser unit entirely." Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised to see a woman in corporate business attire diving into the guts of a broken printer. He stepped back, gesturing for me to take the lead. "Be my guest. She is all yours." For the next 15 minutes, we worked side by side in a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. It was honest, physical work, a massive departure from the invisible, toxic mind games playing out 39 floors above us. We popped the side panels, manually disengaged the heated fuser rollers, and began pulling out accordioned sheets of thick presentation paper. We fell into an easy, joking banter, passing screwdrivers and tension wrenches back and forth like we had been working the same shift for years. "You have got pretty good hands for someone who works in this building," Marcus noted, wiping a fresh smudge of ink from his forehead. "Most of the folks I see around here look like they would break out in hives if they had to use a Phillips head screwdriver." I laughed, yanking a particularly stubborn wad of paper from the secondary feeder. "Do not let the blouse fool you. I started out fixing forklift hydraulic lines in a shipping yard in Detroit. I only moved into the corporate side because I thought the air conditioning would be nice. Turns out, I vastly preferred the grease to the absolute garbage they try to sell upstairs." Marcus chuckled. blowing a speck of dust off a sensor. Not a fan of upper management. I take it. Let us just say I have zero respect for men in expensive suits who try to sell a structurally rotten system using fraudulent, brightly colored charts, I said, my tone half joking but laced with a very real, sharp edge of bitterness. Right now, up on the 40th floor, my lovely boss is likely popping champagne, trying to secure a multi-billion-dollar merger based on a safety record that is 100% fake. They are deferring maintenance on heavy trucks just to make the profit margins look pretty for the buyers. I paused, suddenly realizing I was venting corporate secrets to a random maintenance worker. Sorry, I sighed, shaking my head. It has been a spectacularly bad month. When I looked over at Marcus, his hands had stopped moving. The casual, friendly demeanor he had just a moment ago seemed to evaporate, replaced by an incredibly still, sharp focus. He did not look confused, and he did not ask for clarification or brush off my complaint like a normal janitor would. His eyes, dark and highly calculating, bored into me for a fraction of a second. Deferred maintenance, you said, Marcus asked, his voice suddenly much lower and entirely devoid of its previous casual humor. He did not ask for any unnecessary gossip. He zeroed right in on the operational flaw. Yes, I replied, feeling a strange shift in the energy of the room. Skipped brake inspections, falsified collision reports, the works. The buyers are about to purchase a fleet of rolling coffins. Marcus held my gaze for a moment longer. Then, he simply nodded, turning his attention back to the printer without pressing for another single detail. Well, he murmured quietly, expertly sliding the newly cleared paper tray back into its housing. People who cut corners like that usually end up getting caught in the gears eventually. The heavy plastic tray clicked firmly into place. Instantly, the error lights on the control panel blinked from angry red to a steady, solid green. The machine hummed deeply, cycling its internal fans, preparing to resume the print job that had broken it in the first place. I wiped my hands on a spare rag, completely unaware that the documents about to spit out of that tray would change the trajectory of my entire life. The heavy industrial printer roared to life, pulling crisp, thick cardstock from the newly cleared tray. The rhythmic thumping of the fuser unit echoed off the concrete walls of the sub-basement as it rapidly began spitting out the queued documents from the executive suite. It was the final, comprehensive merger packet for the Omnicorp delegation, glossy pages filled with brightly colored charts, executive summaries, and legally binding declarations cascaded violently into the output tray. The machine was printing so fast that one of the heavy pages clipped the edge of the plastic guide and fluttered gently to the linoleum floor, landing right beside my shoe. I bent down to pick it up, intending to simply place it back on top of the neatly aligned stack, but as my eyes brushed over the bold, capitalized heading at the top of the page, my entire body froze. The blood in my veins turned to absolute ice. My lungs seized, completely forgetting how to draw in oxygen. The document in my hand was titled Comprehensive Operational Safety and Fleet Integrity Guarantee. It was the exact section of the merger agreement detailing our preventative maintenance schedules, accident reports, and overall logistical liability. It was the exact section filled with Julian's fabricated, multi-million-dollar lies. I scanned the paragraphs of dense legal jargon, my eyes finally landing on the bottom right corner of the page. Right there, below a boilerplate clause swearing to the absolute accuracy of the provided metrics under penalty of perjury, was an authorization line. It did not bear Julian's name. It bore mine. My full legal name, my specific employee identification number, and a flawlessly replicated digital timestamp of my certified electronic signature were stamped firmly onto the dotted line. I was officially designated as the primary authorizing officer for the entire dataset. The reality of what I was looking at hit me with the force of a speeding freight train. Julian had not just revoked my server access to keep me quiet. He had locked me out so I could not see that he was actively framing me. He was deliberately using my credentials to rubber stamp the fraudulent data. When the Omnicorp auditors eventually discovered the missing brake inspections and the covered-up highway collisions, Julian would simply throw his hands in the air, feign complete ignorance, and present this exact document. He would claim that his rogue, incompetent logistics coordinator had doctored the numbers entirely without his knowledge. This was no longer just a dirty, pathetic game of corporate office politics. This was a massive, orchestrated act of corporate fraud. If those signatures were legally ratified in the boardroom today, I would not just lose my job or face public humiliation. I would be facing multiple charges of federal wire fraud and criminal negligence. I was looking at a very real possibility of spending 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. The initial, paralyzing shock instantly evaporated, replaced by a surge of white-hot, blinding rage. Every single instinct in my body shifted violently from defense to absolute, predatory offense. I reached a shaking hand into the inside breast pocket of my blazer, my fingers curling tightly around the cold metal of my encrypted flash drive. The sharp edges of the drive pressed painfully into my palm, leaving deep red indentations, but the physical sensation only sharpened my focus. I could not wait for the merger to finalize and hope to blow the whistle afterward. By then, the ink would be dry, the money would be wired, and my legal fate would be entirely sealed. The bomb had to go off right now, right in the middle of their perfect, multi-billion-dollar celebration. I did not say another word. I dropped the forged document right back onto the stack, turned on my heel, and marched out of the mailroom. My eyes locked dead ahead on the heavy steel doors of the main elevator bank. Behind me, the industrial printer continued its rhythmic thumping. Marcus did not call out to stop me. He stood quietly by the machine, slowly wiping the residual black toner from his hands with his dirty rag. He watched my retreating figure until the heavy fire doors swung shut behind me. Then, with a face completely devoid of its former easygoing charm, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek smartphone, and rapidly typed out a single, silent text message. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt as though it took an entire lifetime. I watched the digital floor indicator climb higher and higher, the soft mechanical hum of the cabin acting as a metronome for my racing heartbeat. When the polished metal doors finally slid open, I stepped out into the plush, heavily carpeted hallway of the executive suite. The air up here was entirely different from the sub-basement. It was cold, aggressively filtered, and smelled distinctly of expensive cologne and freshly brewed artisanal coffee. I did not stop at the reception desk. I marched straight past the bewildered administrative assistants, my eyes locked on the massive, custom-built oak doors of the VIP boardroom. I pushed the heavy doors open with enough force that the brass handles slammed sharply against the drywall. The loud, resounding crack echoed off the panoramic glass windows, instantly shattering the carefully curated atmosphere inside. The entire boardroom was frozen in time. Julian was standing at the head of a massive mahogany table, holding a glowing laser pointer. He was right in the middle of a heavily rehearsed, flowery monologue about our unparalleled logistical synergy and the forward-thinking strategic vision that would supposedly drive our profit margins through the roof. At the sound of the doors hitting the wall, the laser pointer trembled in his hand, its tiny red dot dancing erratically across a brightly colored projection screen. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. You could have heard a single pin drop on the thick carpet. Julian's artificially tanned face drained of all its color, turning a sickly, pale shade of gray. His eyes darted nervously around the room, taking in the shocked faces of the AeroShift board of directors. Panic, raw and unfiltered, flashed across his features. He hurriedly fumbled for the intercom button on the console in front of him, trying to control the rapidly deteriorating narrative. Security, Julian hissed into the microphone, his voice dripping with venom but clearly shaking with underlying fear. Get building security up to the VIP suite immediately. We have a highly disruptive situation. Please escort this disgruntled subordinate off the premises. She is currently undergoing the termination process and has absolutely no authorization to be on this floor. I did not say a single word. I did not yell. I did not throw the forged safety document in his face, and I did not display a single ounce of anger. I knew that in a room full of corporate sharks, the person who loses their temper loses the war. Instead, I walked into the room with deliberate, measured steps. The sharp click of my heels against the polished hardwood border of the floor sounded like a ticking clock counting down his final moments. Every single eye in the room tracked my movements. I walked past the bewildered executives, ignoring their hostile glares, and made my way to the furthest end of the long table. I calmly pulled out a heavy leather chair in the darkest, most shadowed corner of the room. I sat down, placed my laptop squarely on the table, and opened the lid. I retrieved the encrypted metal flash drive from my pocket, plugged it into the side port, and then simply leaned back. I crossed my arms over my chest and stared directly into Julian's eyes. I was not a chaotic disruptor. I had assumed the perfectly still, terrifying posture of a hunter patiently waiting for her prey to step directly into an inescapable trap. Julian swallowed hard. From 20 feet away, I could actually see the nervous sweat beading on his forehead. He desperately tried to salvage his dignity and the atmosphere of the room. I sincerely apologize for that incredibly unprofessional interruption. Gentlemen, Julian stammered, wiping his brow with a silk handkerchief. He tried to resume his presentation, clicking to the next slide, but the confident, booming executive voice he had relied on for years was completely gone. His words were hollow, his breathing was shallow, and his voice cracked noticeably as he attempted to read the bullet points on the screen. He kept casting terrified, paranoid glances toward my dark corner of the room, completely thrown off balance by my absolute silence. Right at that excruciatingly tense moment, precisely at 9 o'clock, the main double doors of the boardroom clicked open once again. The tension in the room instantly shifted from internal panic to external sycophancy. The OmniCorp delegation had arrived. Every single AeroShift executive, including a heavily perspiring Julian, leaped out of their leather chairs. They stood at perfect attention, smoothing their expensive lapels and plastering desperate, fawning smiles across their faces, ready to worship the people holding the checkbook. A team of lawyers and financial analysts in sharp, tailored suits filed into the room, taking their respective places along the opposite side of the table. I kept my head down for a moment, waiting for the leader of the delegation to step through the frame. When the final set of footsteps entered the room, I slowly looked up from my screen and allowed a tiny, razor-sharp smirk to form on my lips. Leading the OmniCorp delegation, carrying a sleek leather portfolio and commanding the absolute attention of every single person in the room, was the billionaire chief executive officer. He was the man holding the ultimate power of life and death over this multi-billion-dollar acquisition. It was Marcus. He was no longer hunched over a broken machine in the sub-basement. He had simply rolled down the sleeves of his faded blue button-down shirt and thrown a tailored charcoal blazer over his shoulders. But as he confidently reached out to pull back his chair at the center of the table, my eyes locked onto his left wrist. Right there, on the very edge of his rolled-down cuff, was a faint, undeniable smudge of black printer toner. Julian practically threw himself across the room the second Marcus crossed the threshold. He extended his perfectly manicured hand, flashing a desperate, blinding smile. "Sir, it is an absolute honor to finally welcome you to AeroShift. I am Julian, the Chief Operating Officer, and I am thrilled to—" Marcus did not even break his stride. He walked right past Julian's outstretched hand as if the man were completely invisible, leaving Julian standing awkwardly in the middle of the room. A profound, icy chill settled over the boardroom. The AeroShift board members exchanged panicked, wide-eyed glances. Marcus walked straight to the center of the massive mahogany table. He placed his leather portfolio down and retrieved the exact stack of freshly printed documents we had just liberated from the sub-basement. He did not sit. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept across the glowing projection screen displaying Julian's fabricated profit margins, and then slowly settled on Julian. With deliberate, excruciating slowness, Marcus flipped open the document packet. He bypassed the executive summaries and the marketing fluff, turning directly to the operational safety guarantee. He tapped his index finger against the heavy cardstock. Julian, Marcus began, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that demanded absolute silence. I have been reviewing your operational expenditure reports. I have 3 very simple questions for you. Julian swallowed audibly, scurrying back to his side of the table like a scolded child. Of course, sir. Absolute transparency is our core synergy. First, Marcus said, completely ignoring the corporate jargon. How exactly did AeroShift reduce heavy vehicle maintenance costs to 0 for the last 2 quarters without grounding a single truck? Second, why are federal brake inspections missing for over 200 active transport vehicles? And third, how did you miraculously achieve a 45% reduction in highway collisions during the heaviest freight season of the decade, while simultaneously cutting the budget for driver safety training entirely? They were the exact operational flaws I had explained to him just an hour ago in the dusty mailroom. Julian began to sweat profusely. The expensive fabric of his custom suit darkened under his arms. He tugged violently at his silk tie, his breathing shallow and rapid. Well, you see, the efficiency metrics are currently under review. Those specific data sets were compiled by subordinate auditing departments. There might be a slight lag in the data integration due to internal restructuring. I assure you, it is merely a clerical delay. Marcus did not entertain the pathetic excuse. He turned his head away from the trembling chief operating officer and looked directly into the dark corner of the room where I was sitting in perfect silence. Ms. Reyes, Marcus called out, his voice echoing clearly across the expansive room. What do you think about these figures bearing your forged signature? The entire room whipped their heads around to stare at me. I calmly stood up. I picked up my laptop, walked straight to the main presentation console at the head of the table, and unceremoniously yanked Julian's connection cable out of the socket. I plugged in my encrypted flash drive. Instantly, the massive projection screen shifted from Julian's soothing, deceitful blue charts to my raw data sheets. The screen lit up in glaring, aggressive red warning highlights. I think, I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion, that they constitute federal wire fraud, criminal negligence, and massive corporate embezzlement. I clicked to the first slide. What you are looking at is the actual, unfiltered maintenance ledger for the last 6 months. Julian explicitly ordered regional managers to skip mandatory brake replacements and engine overhauls to artificially inflate the quarterly cash flow by nearly $4 million. I clicked to the next slide. Here are the unedited collision reports. Julian commanded low-level clerks to reclassify severe highway accidents as minor cosmetic scratches, suppressing millions of dollars in insurance liabilities. I clicked to the final, most damning slide. It displayed a stark black terminal screen filled with lines of server code. And finally, this is the internal network security log from yesterday at 2 o'clock in the morning. After revoking my system access, Julian used an administrative override from his exact office IP address to digitally stamp my federally certified signature onto the final safety guarantee, attempting to make me the sole legal fall guy for his entire operation. I did not raise my voice once. I delivered the facts clearly, clinically, driving each word into the silent room like heavy steel nails slamming shut the lid of Julian's career coffin. The AeroShift board of directors erupted into absolute chaos. Men and women in expensive suits began shouting, pointing accusing fingers, and frantically calling their legal teams. Julian's knees buckled. He collapsed heavily into his chair, his face a sickening shade of chalk white. His hands shook violently as he stared at the undeniable proof of his crimes projected at 30 feet wide. He looked utterly destroyed. Marcus simply reached out and closed his leather folder, immediately silencing the chaotic room. The merger will proceed, Marcus announced firmly. Omnicorp is purchasing your infrastructure, not your incompetent leadership. However, this deal is moving forward on one non-negotiable condition. Julian is terminated immediately, without any severance package, and AeroShift will hand all of this gathered evidence directly to the federal authorities for criminal prosecution. No one dared to argue. The board members practically tripped over themselves, nodding in agreement. eager to throw Julian to the wolves to save their own millions. As the security guards finally arrived to physically escort a sobbing, hyperventilating Julian out of the building, Marcus ignored the chaos. He walked slowly around the table, stopping right in front of me. The imposing, terrifying billionaire executive vanished for a brief second, replaced by the man from the basement. He reached into the breast pocket of his blazer and pulled out a thick, heavily embossed business card. He handed it to me with a warm, knowing smile. "Aeroshift is going to need a massive structural overhaul once we take over," Marcus said quietly. "I am appointing you as the new director of integrated operations for the merged conglomerate. Effective immediately, you clearly know how to fix a broken system." I took the card, feeling the heavy stock between my fingers, and allowed a genuine smile to finally break across my face. Marcus turned to leave, but he paused at the doorway, looking back over his shoulder. "Oh, and Ms. Reyes," he added, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Next time there is a paper jam, remember to call me directly." Thank you so much for listening to today's story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's corporate takedown satisfying and want to help us keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us on Patreon. We have a growing library of exclusive, incredibly wild true revenge stories with amazing voice acting that we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube. You can join our community by scanning the QR code on your screen right now, or by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment. Until next time, stay sharp and always keep your receipts.